Chapter 17. He would not let me go. The rumor reached the workshop before the noon bells. Not through a herald. Not by a palace carriage. Through the street, which is how truth and lies both arrive when they want to hurt quickly. A ribbon buyer whispered it first while pretending to inspect frostleaf quality. Then the bead mender's apprentice ran past our open shutters shouting to someone up the stairwell that the Crown Prince had refused a Greek house match in open session. 10 minutes later, a peddler in the lane outside started selling hand-copied summary sheets of the Morning Council under the title Prince Defies Stability Faction, which was so ugly and so accurate I nearly dropped the thread in my hand. I was halfway through sorting silver nib petals from the salvage bowl when the words finally settled into sense. He refused it. Formally. After I left. The petal I held split down the middle under my fingers. Master Lara, who had been arguing with a woman over the price of mourning ribbon at the front counter, did not turn around when she said, "If you tear one more usable bloom apart from distraction, I'll charge you for stock damage." I put the ruined petal aside and reached for another with hands that had forgotten for one breath how to belong to me. The rumor came again in a different mouth before I could decide whether to believe it. The cooper's wife from across the lane stopped at the open door under the pretense of asking whether her niece's wedding ring could still be adjusted narrower and then, in the same breath, told Master Ilara that Lord Harrow's people had left the council chamber furious because His Highness had refused to let Lady Vivienne's name be used as a public reassurance. She said it with the bright, avid look of someone who knew this was half scandal and half political weather and could not decide which made it tastier. Master Ilara gave her the adjusted ring, took her coin, and said, "If you've come to buy rumor, there's a stall 3 doors down that sells candied nuts and nonsense by weight." The woman had the decency to blush and the indecency not to leave immediately. I kept my eyes on the table, not because I was above listening, because if anyone in the room saw what those words had done to my face, I would never survive the day with dignity intact. He refused it. The line repeated itself like a pulse under skin. The broadside with my house line printed at the bottom still lay folded under the weight stone near the ledger. The public accusation was barely half a day old. My mother's letter still rested inside the needle box in my satchel, the paper only just drying where my tears had fallen on it. The unfinished crown lay wrapped in linen under the workbench because I had not trusted myself to leave it farther away than my feet. Everything in me still ached with the rawness of leaving the palace while he remained in it. And now the city was saying he had refused them anyway. I told myself not to read too much into rumor. The city embroidered anything bright enough to bleed. By the third retelling, a prince's simple no became a speech shouted from the rout table, and a duchess's quiet displeasure became broken betrothal and shattered goblets. Still, I reached for a salvage stem. Missed. Tried again. Master Ilara came into the back room at last carrying the empty mourning ribbon spool and looked at my hands. "You're binding air," she said. I looked down. I was. The silver thread had gone nowhere. I had been twisting it around my own finger without bloom or stem under it, tightening and tightening until the skin at the base of my knuckle had gone red. I unwound it quickly. "Sorry." "No, you aren't. You're somewhere else." She set the spool down on the shelf and nodded toward the front. "Take the Lane copy if you want it." The nut seller left one on the windowsill when I called him a parasite. I stared. "He left you one?" He said free advertising suited my tone. She snorted. "Imbecile." Then she looked at me more directly than she had since I returned. "If you're going to bleed over the rumor, do it over the actual words and not whatever your mind is inventing in advance." That was not kindness. It was worse. Useful. I wiped my hands on the work cloth, went to the front, and took the cheap summary sheet from the sill. The paper was already smeared at the edges from too many fingers. The script had been copied in haste by someone literate enough to weaponize speed. The first lines were nonsense about emergency route deliberations. The second lines were meaner. But there, halfway down the sheet under a badly inked heading about noble dispute, the copyist had summarized what mattered. His Highness rejected immediate renewal of the Harrow match, calling public use of Lady Vivienne's name cowardice dressed as statecraft. I sat down on the stool by the display shelf because my knees had remembered gravity all at once. Master Alara had continued cutting ribbon behind the counter without looking at me. Well, I read the line twice more because I hated the shape of my own hope and trusted it less than bad paper. He said that, I murmured. He seems to have, Master Alara said dryly. I stared at the sheet until the letters blurred. Then at my own hands. Then at nothing at all. The first feeling was surprise, sharp enough to be almost fear. Not because I doubted him. Not entirely. Because the room inside my own heart had spent the whole morning trying not to imagine what it would mean if he had done exactly this. The second feeling came under it so quickly I barely had time to defend against it. Joy. Not the soft, pretty sort. The rough, bright kind that hurts because it arrives wrapped in the knowledge of cost. He had refused them, publicly enough that the lower street had it before noon, publicly enough that hand-copied scandal sheets could sell it to bead apprentices and ribbon buyers, publicly enough that Oren had failed, at least in that one clean moment, to set Lady Vivienne on the table and call it destiny. Then the joy turned. Not to pain exactly. To wait. If the Lane knew this by noon, the palace already knew how much it would cost him. Master Alara slid the scissors into the counter groove and came to stand in front of me. Stop making that face. What face? The one where happiness and doom are wrestling in the same square foot. I laughed despite myself and immediately wanted to cry. That's very specific. I raised you badly. She took the cheap sheet from my hand, skimmed the copied lines, and grunted. He's either brave or badly raised too. I could not answer that. Not because I disagreed, because the truth of it sat too close to my throat. The front bell chimed again. A customer came in for 2 simple travel ribbons and left with only one because prices had climbed overnight. A messenger boy delivered half a crate of common white buds from the northern terraces because West Chain stock still had not normalized enough to trust. Life went on in the quarter because it always did. Hunger, weddings, mourning, repairs, births, route delays, stupid rumors, all moving alongside each other like lanes no one asked permission to cross. By afternoon the workshop had settled into the strained rhythm of a place doing necessary work under a city's changing mood. 3 women came in for narrow mourning loops. One bride's aunt wanted to strip the decorative silver from an order because the family no longer wished to appear extravagant in unstable conditions. A young dock porter bought the cheapest route charm ribbon we stocked and tied it around his wrist before leaving because his line assignment had shifted to the upper spans and he had seen the burst lamp from below. No one mentioned my name to my face. That was worse than accusation. It meant they had already decided how much of me to believe and did not need my help arranging it. At the back table I worked through 2 salvage trays and began sorting the better preserved white blooms from the latest North shipment. My mother's design packet lay hidden under the lower drawer of the side bench where no customer would ever see it. The unfinished crown remained wrapped in linen under the work cloth. I could feel it there the way one feels a wound under bandage without needing to look. Twice I caught myself turning toward the door for no reason. Not because I expected him. That would have been madness. Because every sound in the lane had become charged with possibility after the rumor sheet. A footstep, a courier knock, a turn of the bell, any of them might have carried news. By the 5th time I checked the street without meaning to, Master Alara said, "If you wear a path into the floor, I'm charging the prince for repairs." That won a real laugh from me, brief and helpless. Very mercenary of you. I contain multitudes. The laughter faded and the room seemed quieter for it. I looked down at the white blooms in my hand. If he did say it, Master Alara did not let me finish. Then he said it, she answered from the ribbon shelf. And now you decide what that means to you instead of what the city wants it to mean. I tried to keep working. For another hour I even succeeded. Then dusk came and with it a note. Not by palace courier. Thank every star for that. By a thin little girl in a cooper's apron who could not have been more than 9 and looked so determined in her task that I almost saluted her on principle. She came into the shop just as Master Ilara was lowering the side display shutters and asked, in a voice too solemn for her size, whether the Belrose woman still sold fast-binding thread for morning work. I am the Belrose woman at present, I said. She gave me a folded scrap of dark paper from inside her apron and then, because children deserve to be children where possible, asked whether the white ribbon by the window cost less in remnant lengths. Master Ilara sold her 3 arm spans for half price and a pair besides. When the girl left, I opened the note. No crest, no perfume, no wasted words. North Dye Loft, Upper Lane, Twilight. Come alone if you want truth. Do not use the main stair. The hand was elegant enough to be educated and disciplined enough to conceal itself on purpose. I did not need a signature. I knew whose invitation felt like a knife wrapped in silk. Master Ilara watched me read. Problem? Possibly. Good. She dusted her hands against her apron. Take the back stair, then. If you're going to do something foolish, at least do it with structural awareness. I stared at her. Did you somehow read over my shoulder with the back of your head? No. She untied her apron, folded it once, and set it by the cash box. But you've got the face you get right before difficult customers or illegal exits. The North Dye Loft had been empty for 6 years. The family that owned it moved to the lower freight chain after the last tax rise on color imports, and no one since had bothered renting a space with stained vats, a cracked roof seam, and a stair narrow enough to insult most furniture. Children dared each other onto the lower landing when bored. Apprentices used the roofline sometimes for secret smoking. By twilight, it usually held only old cedar scent, dust, and one surviving iron vat no one had the back to haul away. I took the alley stair and not the main one. The lane between the bead mender and the empty loft still held the damp mineral smell of old dye even after all that time. Someone had scratched a rude route official caricature into the wall by the 3rd step landing. A feral white cat watched me from the roofline with the expression of a landlord collecting late rent. The top loft door stood ajar. Inside, twilight had gone violet against the cracked window panes. The old vats sat like dark mouths in the floor. One hanging lantern had been lit and hooded low, enough to silver the dust without giving the lane outside much to see. Vivienne Harrow stood by the broken west window in a plain charcoal cloak with the hood thrown back. Even dressed to disappear, she failed elegantly. Not because the cloak was expensive, it probably was, but that was not the point. Because she had the bearing of a woman who knew how rooms looked before entering them and shaped herself accordingly. The loft's rough timber beams and stained floor should have made her seem out of place. Instead, they made the control in her face more visible. You came, she said. You asked for truth. It seemed unwise to send regrets. The corner of her mouth moved. Not amusement. Approval, perhaps. She gestured toward the only chair not caked in dust. I ignored it and stayed standing. She appeared unsurprised. I won't keep you long, she said. The palace is inventing 3 versions of your departure and at least 2 of them are insulting. Only 3? Give them until midnight. The line came so dryly it pulled another reluctant laugh out of me. Vivienne did not waste time after that. He refused it formally this afternoon, she said. Not the lane sheet version. Not the hand-copied outrage. Formally. Before the Royal Family Council and the Route Advisory Board both. He refused any further use of my house in a stabilizing arrangement and stated he would not negotiate marriage under duress from route panic or manufactured scandal. The last 2 words sat between us with bright, precise edge. Manufactured, I repeated. She nodded once. He used that word. The joy hit me again, rawer this time because it came from her mouth and not a cheap sheet passed hand to hand through the quarter. Vivienne watched my face and, because she was too intelligent to grant me privacy where truth would help more, said, "You are pleased." "I'm trying not to be obvious. An impossible task in your case. That should have annoyed me. Instead it steadied me." She crossed to the vat nearest the lantern and rested one hand on the iron rim. He also invoked Crown Prince authority over Old Route Holdings. Orrin objected. The Chancellor allowed a limited seal review pending fuller legal argument. A faint hard edge entered her voice. "Which means Julian has bought time, not victory." My chest tightened. Of course. Nothing at the palace came clean. "What does that mean in practice?" I asked. "It means he has moved the question from rumor into law, which Orrin hates." She looked at me directly. "It also means he is burning favor at a rate that will alarm every comfortable man in the council by week's end." The joy shifted again. Not gone. Waited. Vivienne did not soften that either. "He knows it," she said. "He did it anyway." Silence moved through the loft, carrying old dye and dust and the thin twilight chill that always settles into upper empty rooms. Outside, the workshop quarter was closing. Shutters. Parts. Someone calling for lamp oil. Farther off, a bell from the lower route stair. "Why are you telling me?" I asked, though I already knew part of the answer. "Because if I leave you with only the broadside and the lane rumors, you'll make a martyr's decision out of incomplete arithmetic." She paused. "And because I have chosen a side." I went still. The lantern flame shifted once in its hooded glass. Vivienne's face sharpened and softened with it in turns. "Orrin expected me to become a stabilizing symbol," she said. "A marriage answer, a noble reassurance, a quiet line on a public notice. I dislike being used by men who mistake strategy for entitlement." Her gaze did not waver, so I refused him the use. The words sounded simple. I knew better. A woman like her did not refuse lightly inside that palace and walk out with no blood on the hem. "You can do that," I said. Her brow lifted, barely. "I can do enough." Then, because perhaps she judged me ready for the more dangerous version, she added, "3 houses follow Harrow's lead on route. Confidence matters whether they admit it in front of men or not. I have already advised restraint on any measure that would formally confine you or cede archival custody to Orrin." The room seemed to tighten around that fact. "You moved noble votes," I said. "Not votes. Hesitations." A small cold smile touched her mouth. "Often more powerful." I believed her. That frightened me in a new direction. She reached inside the cloak and withdrew a narrow sealed strip of folded paper. No crest outside. Only a tiny inner tack mark where the wax had been broken and resealed. "I am not supposed to have seen this," she said. "Which is why you are definitely not supposed to know it exists." I took the paper. The hand was not hers. Tighter. Mail. Official. It listed a transfer request between the Central Route Archive and Stewardship Storage Annex C under Emergency Custody Seal. 4 items were referenced only by code. The date line was 2 years old. The receiving authoriser's name had been partially scraped from the copy before it reached whichever set of hands passed it to Vivienne. Only one note line remained fully legible at the bottom. "Original accident material not for open route inventory." A pulse of cold went through me. "The original record," I said. "Possibly." Vivienne nodded. "Or part of it. Enough for Orrin to fear if he keeps it separate from public route holdings." The dye loft seemed suddenly smaller. "The annex," I said. "Where?" "Old stewardship subcellar under the East Administration Court. Not the modern route archive. A place no one below minister level bothers to remember because it was meant to store pre-reform treaty materials and legal bones too inconvenient to destroy and too dangerous to circulate." I looked up at her. She did not blink. Julian knows? I asked. Not yet from me. Her mouth flattened slightly. I intended to tell him tonight. Then I decided you deserved the truth before you decided whether leaving had become staying by another name. The line struck too deep and too clean to defend against, because that was exactly what had been happening in me since the needle box. Leaving had cut the trap. It had not ended the road. Vivienne saw my silence and read it accurately. You are thinking of going back, she said. I did not answer. It was answer enough. She inclined her head. Good. The word shocked me more than it should have. Good. Yes. She pulled the cloak more closely around her shoulders, though the loft was not cold enough to require it. A shield gesture, perhaps. Or habit. Because if you stayed hidden here while he spent the next 3 days tearing the 40 from Orne one narrow strip at a time, I would begin to think your mother's blood was less interesting than the records claim. That should have offended me. Instead it steadied me so abruptly I almost laughed. I folded the paper strip carefully and slid it into my inner pocket beside the sealant scrap. Vivienne watched the motion and then said, with the calm of a woman placing a blade exactly where it needed to go, "He has not let you go." The words struck harder than if Julian himself had spoken them. Not because they were romantic. Because they were practical. True in the way routes are true, demonstrated by movement, not declaration. I looked away toward the cracked window where twilight had gone almost fully blue. The upper roofs beyond were a darker shape against the sky. Somewhere past them, the palace glowed in pale layers like a lie too beautiful to collapse quickly. No, I said. Vivienne was quiet for a beat. Then, good. When I returned to the shop, Master Ilara took one look at my face and said, "You've either been kissed or handed a route map. That's a deranged set of options." And I unfastened my coat, set the folded transfer strip and the sealant scrap on the work table, and said, "The second one." Shame. She took the strip, read the surviving line, and swore softly. "That's ugly. That's Orne. That's governance," she said. Then, seeing something in me sharpen at the word, she corrected herself with unusual gentleness. "No, that's men mistaking custody for right." We had just enough time to relight the back work lamp and pretend for half an hour that the workshop quarters' ordinary evening mattered more than palace rot when the second knock came. Not the front bell this time. The back lane door. 3 short taps. Pause. 2 more. Master Ilara looked at me. I looked at her. Then she set down the wire cutter and went to fetch the hammer she kept by the flour bin because she trusted no secret knock in a city going strange. I went to the back door and opened it a careful hand's width. Marcus Hale stood in the lane in a plain dark coat with no visible insignia and the expression of a man who would have preferred battering the whole quarter flat to using coated taps. Felix loomed behind him under a hood too thin to disguise the way he vibrated when carrying important forbidden knowledge. Both had city dust on their boots and looked as though they had come fast and quietly from somewhere no honest errand had brought them. I opened the door wider. "Come in before the lane decides to start reading lips," I said. Felix slipped inside first and nearly caught his sleeve on the door latch because scholars were not built for dignified clandestine work. Marcus ducked after him and shut the door without sound. Master Ilara appeared from the workroom doorway with the hammer still in hand. Marcus saw it, judged it fair, and gave one short nod. "Master Ilara." "Captain." Felix pushed back his hood and went straight for the back table where the lamp burned. He placed a wrapped packet down, then another smaller one, then looked at the folded transfer strip lying there already and blinked. "You've been busy," he said. Master Ilara waved the hammer once. "State your purpose before I decide you look breakable." Marcus, to my everlasting respect, did not object to the weapon or the tone. "His Highness sent no written message," he said. "That was deliberate. If stopped, nothing on us links directly to him. But he knows where you are, Miss Belrose. and he asked only one question before allowing us out of the palace. Something in my chest tightened. I hated that I needed to know. I hated more that I already did. What question? I asked. Marcus held my gaze. Whether you left because you wished never to return. I looked down at the work table for one heartbeat because the force of that nearly knocked the breath from me. Felix, perhaps sensing that if he did not take over the next line Marcus might accidentally become human, blurted he did not believe it. That startled a laugh out of me despite everything, wet around the edges and not fit for public hearing. Felix, Marcus said. What? It's relevant. It was. Cruelly. Marcus set the larger wrapped packet beside the transfer strip Vivienne had given me and unrolled it. Inside lay copied route custody ledgers, 2 sealed talas, and a narrow corridor map of the East Administration Court lower levels. On the last sheet, 3 storage doors were marked in Felix's impatient hand and one had been circled twice in angry ink. Annex C, I said. Marcus's brows rose a fraction. Lady Vivienne reached you first. There was no point pretending otherwise. She said enough. Felix let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. Good. Saves time. We've got independent confirmation now. Julian used Crown Prince authority to demand comparative transfer records from the stewardship storage chain. The main office delayed. He pushed. Orrin pushed back. 2 hours later, a junior accounting clerk suddenly remembered that Annex C received sealed legacy items under restricted authorizers for years after the supposed purge. The room had gone very still again. Master Alara set the hammer down but did not move away from it. Marcus tapped the circled door on the map. Old subcellar. 1 route access stair from the East Administration Court. 1 maintenance passage no longer on current public plans. Guarded lightly because no one expects anything there worth stealing. Felix's mouth thinned, which in palatial terms means full of priceless incriminating rot. I leaned over the map. The maintenance passage ran beneath the old record wing and joined a dry service corridor near the forgotten legal vaults. Narrow, badly ventilated. Exactly the sort of place the palace would ignore until it needed its secrets moved elsewhere. And Julian? I asked. That was the true question. Not only the map. Not only the records. Him. Marcus answered this one without deflection. He formally rejected the Harrow arrangement again in the family council chamber, he said. Twice, because the Queen's advisor thought changing rooms might improve the answer. It did not. My pulse kicked so hard it hurt. Felix leaned on the back of my chair, eyes fever bright with anger and admiration both. He has locked Orrin out of 3 route holding rooms, reassigned 2 harbor officers, angered half the confidence faction, and informed the Chancellor that if 1 more broadside appears under public seal before record review, he will call for a full stewardship audit in open chamber. I stared at him. Felix, discovering that he had my full attention and enjoying it indecently, continued. The Chancellor nearly swallowed his own signet. It was marvelous. Marcus added, more dryly, it was politically catastrophic. Both can be true, Felix said. They can. That was the problem. The joy that had been hurting me all afternoon flared again, brighter this time because it came with detail and cost attached. He had not merely refused once in public and then softened behind doors. He had gone on refusing, room after room, person after person, enough to shake council confidence and force Orrin into legal defense instead of elegant rumor. And still he had asked whether I meant never to return. Something in me shifted. Not suddenly, not with fanfare, only into alignment. Running had been necessary. Staying run was not. Marcus reached into his coat and set one final object on the table. It was not a letter, not a signet, only a narrow strip of dark route cloth cut from the inner brace lining of a royal navigation case, folded once around a tiny silver pin in the shape of a 4-point star. I looked at it without touching. He said if you chose not to come back, Marcus said, I was not to use sentiment against you. Felix made a face. A dreadful instruction. Marcus ignored him. He also said you should know the East Archive map is not enough by itself. The old route pattern above the Capitol still matters. The gallery. The crown dial. The returning crown in my mother's design. I picked up the tiny star pin. Warmth moved through me so quickly it almost became pain. Not because the object was precious in itself. Because it carried his restraint. He had not written, had not ordered, had not called me back in words I could not easily refuse. He had sent only enough for me to know the path he was on and left the choosing in my hands. My mother's letter flashed through me then. If you must choose between being safely hidden and being necessary, choose with your own will. There it was. Again and again. Not command. Not being taken. Return by will. I looked up at Marcus. One, I asked. Felix straightened. Marcus's face changed by less than a breath. The annex? Marcus said. Tomorrow night if possible. Oren's moved 2 custody boxes already after sunset today. If the original accident material is there, he won't leave it once he suspects Julian has the trail. I turned to the workbench where my mother's unfinished crown waited wrapped in linen beside the design packet. The room narrowed around it. Master Ilara saw my gaze and said nothing. Vivienne's strip lay under my palm. The star pin rested against my skin. Felix vibrated like a route lamp refusing modesty. Marcus stood quiet and hard by the back door, already measuring exits and time. And under all of it, clear as cut silver, ran the truth I had been trying not to say aloud since opening the hidden panel in the needle box. I could not end this by staying gone. Not because he needed saving from me. Not because love, or whatever dangerous shape was growing under my ribs, excused recklessness. Because the road itself had not finished with me. Because the great route seal over the Capitol would kill him if he tried to force it alone. Because Oren had moved the lie into public blood and would move the truth into ash if we let him reach the records first. Because my mother had left me half a crown and the second side was still waiting for my hand. I touched the wrapped, unfinished crown through the linen. Then I looked back at Marcus and Felix. I'm not ending it by running, I said. The words sounded less dramatic aloud than they had in my head. Good. Truth should not need decoration. Felix shut his eyes briefly like a man hearing the correct note after too much bad music. Marcus only nodded once, but the nod held something fiercer than approval. Master Ilara exhaled through her nose. Good. I was about to forbid it on principle. I laughed, and this time the laugh held. Marcus reached for the map again. Then listen carefully. We bent over the worktable while the workshop quarter quieted around us into late evening. Marcus traced the maintenance passage. Felix marked the known custody doors and the probable blind turn where the dry service corridor narrowed. Master Ilara found a second lamp and set it nearer the plans without being asked. I placed Vivienne's transfer strip beside Julian's star pin and my mother's design packet together at the edge of the table, and for the first time since leaving the palace I felt not torn between 2 worlds but standing at the point where they finally met. By the time Marcus and Felix slipped back into the lane under full dark, we had a route into Annex C, a line on Julian's continued fight, and just enough truth to make returning no longer an ache or a fantasy. It was work now. Necessary work. I shut the back door behind them and stood with my hand on the latch for one long breath while the lane beyond went quiet again. Then I crossed the room, unwrapped my mother's unfinished crown, and laid it in the center of my table under the lamp. The empty side waited for my hand. Chapter 18. The place I return to is beside you. I did not sleep. I finished the crown instead. The workshop had gone still hours ago. Master Ilara had banked the back stove low, barred the front shutters, and gone up to her room with a threat that if I burned the place down in revelation, I was paying for timber out of my own future fortune. The lane outside had settled into its night sounds, one late cart groaning past on the lower stones, a distant argument from the stairs 2 alas over, the thin metallic clink of someone shutting a tool chest badly. Ordinary noises. Honest ones. At my table, under the narrow work lamp, the unfinished crown lay between my mother's design sheets and my own hands. Its first half still belonged to her. That was the strangest part. No matter how many times I unwrapped it and studied it, the old work kept the force of someone else's breath in it. The hidden silver returns were tighter than mine would have been, the underhook crossings placed with a patience I rarely allowed myself unless a commission truly mattered, the dried white blooms preserved by some old treatment I had still not fully learned to copy. It was not decorative, not sentimental. Even unfinished, it knew what it had been made to do. The blank second side waited for me like a dare. My mother's letter lay folded open at the left edge of the table, weighted by the chipped glaze bowl so the night air from the back window would not lift it. I had read it 3 more times after Marcus and Felix left. Not because I failed to understand it, because understanding it once had not been enough to survive the shape of it. Do not finish it in my hand. You must complete the second side in your own terms. That was the part that had stopped me longest. Not fear of the work. Fear of the permission. All day I had been trying not to think of returning to the palace as if my life could be solved by distance alone. Leaving had cut one trap. It had not cut the road. My mother had known that before I was old enough to know how to thread a needle straight. Vivienne had seen it. Master Ilara had seen it. Even Marcus, who trusted caution almost as much as he trusted steel, had come to the back lane because some things no longer fit inside waiting. I touched the first design vellum with the tip of one finger, then the wrapped star pin Julian had sent, then the old silver side of the crown. The metal answered cold, the way truth sometimes does before it warms. I opened my work box and laid out what I needed, one piece at a time, not because I was uncertain, but because ritual steadied the hand. 3 lengths of the finest silver thread I had left. Not the common wedding gauge. The thinner one for hidden inner work, the kind most customers never notice because if you've done it properly, they never should. A packet of pale star-glass dust from my mother's box, finer than anything sold openly in the market now. 2 stems of North Chain white lily salvage, the strongest from yesterday's damaged crate, because even bruised flowers can answer beautifully if you know where they are willing to bend. The dried wind blooms from the storm tower circlet. Brittle now, but not useless. Their shape had already helped call one road out of the boundary sky. I trusted them to remember. A small spool of moonvine filament. 1 strip of old white ribbon from my mother's keeping roll. My brass scissors. My narrow-tipped binding needle. Then, after a pause that felt like standing at the lip of something high, I unwrapped the old silver loop from the first harbor crown. The one that had lit in Julian's hand. The one I had stripped and rewound for the luminous lamp. The one that had followed me through storm tower, gallery, ruin, and rout chamber like a piece of the first impossible night, refusing to admit it had ended. It belonged here. I knew that the moment I set it down. The finished crown would not be my mother's. It would not be the palace galleries. It would not be the first festival crown that changed everything. It would be all of them answering one another. I sat for a long time with my hands flat on either side of the table, breathing until the room narrowed to work. Then I began. The first mistake came early. I tried to copy my mother. That sounds reverent. It was vanity. Not the usual loud kind. The quieter one, the kind that thinks love can be proven by imitation. I matched her first return turn exactly. Pulled the silver under the empty side ring with the same spacing she used, set the lily stem at the same angle, and knew before the loop even closed that the line had gone dead in my fingers. Not wrong. Dead. The crown did not fight me. That would have been easier. It only lay there, silent and unanswering, like a door I had mistaken for mine. I sat back and looked at the failed turn until my eyes hurt. Of course. Of course. My mother had written it clearly enough for a tired child to understand, and I had still tried to be clever around it. Do not finish it in my hand. I cut the silver free and unwove the section gently so the old side would not be disturbed. The lily stem had bruised where I forced the angle. I set it aside and chose the second stem instead. This time I did not look first at her drawing. I looked at my own hands. There are habits the workshop quarter puts in a body that palaces never teach because they mistake refinement for correctness. We bind with less waste. We learn where cheap stems split and how to change pressure before they do. We leave a fraction more give in ribbon knots because customers who wear their crowns out into real weather need surviving work, not formal beauty that dies in a drawing room. We mend while we make. We cheat time, not integrity. My mother had hidden the old line in grace. I had learned to keep things alive in strain. So I let the second turn open wider, not sloppily. Breathing room where her line would have sat closer to the ring. The silver took. A pulse ran through the unfinished side so faint I almost thought I imagined it. Then the old half in my mother's hand and the new half in mine settled toward one another by a degree impossible to see and obvious to feel. I exhaled. All right, I murmured to the crown, to her, to myself. My way, then. The night deepened around me. I worked through it one turn at a time. White lily first, not in full bloom line but in a stronger bias across the outer rim where the capital crown points would sit when the work woke. Wind bloom second, not for color, there was hardly any left in the dried petals now, but for memory in the form. The old silver from the harbor crown crossed under the inner ring where the name work channels would need to answer later. Moonvine filament tied the return arc to the outer frame because the design wanted flexibility there, not the formal stiffness of high court ceremonial work. Every choice asked a question. Every answer took shape in the fingers before I had words for it. Once, near midnight, I stopped and read the notation on the last design sheet again. The vow must be returned, not taken. I stared at those words for so long that the lamp flame began to flicker from neglect. Then I looked down at the crown and saw what I had almost missed. A common bridal crown closes inward. All its beauty directs toward the center. Hold, bind, keep, bless. This one did not. The inner silver returns crossed and then turned back out along the hidden ring, making no locked center knot at all. It held by reciprocity. The pressure traveled out and came back, out and came back again. Not weak, stronger because it refused theft. A taken vow could not live in this structure. A given one could. My hands went still. For one breath, in the quiet workshop with the lamp barely breathing and my mother's writing laid open beside me, I understood the whole crown not as object but as argument. Against Oren. Against the council. Against every room that had spoken of marriage as arrangement, blood as ledger, women as useful anchors to keep men and kingdoms in line. My mother had built refusal into the bones of beauty. Something hot and sharp moved through me then, so clean it left no room for tears. I bent over the work again with steadier hands. The hidden channels for the bound names came next. I did not weave them fully. Not yet. That belonged to later, to spoken accord and the capital crown point and whatever would be required when the great route opened or tried to kill us all. But I set the twin paths in place, one along the older side where my mother's return turns held, one along mine, and made sure they met at the center crossing without devouring each other. Side by side. Answer and call. No taking. No command. When the last inner channel settled, the whole crown warmed. Not enough to light. Enough to know. I shut my eyes and touched the inner band with one fingertip. The hidden gallery. The storm tower, the drifting isle basin, the boundary ruin. Julian's hand on the navigator pin while I cast the short path. All of it lived in the structure now, not by memory alone, but by the way the work had learned to hold what made it possible. I did not realize the back window had begun to pale until Master Ilara set a cup down near my elbow hard enough to make the scissors jump. "You're squinting like an old clerk," she said. I lifted my head. Dawn had laid a thin gray bar along the sill and turned the workroom shadows from black to charcoal. My neck ached. One shoulder had gone stiff from leaning too long. The tea she set down smelled of bitter leaf and orange peel and exactly the sort of stubbornness she put into anything meant to revive the living. She looked at the crown, then at me, then back at the crown. "Well," she said after a long breath, "that's not common work." Praise from her, in other words. I smiled before I could stop myself. She noticed, pretended not to. "You haven't eaten," she said. "That sounds accusing." "It is." She left a heel of bread beside the tea and went to open the front shutters. Morning entered the shop in its usual pieces. First the light, then the street sound, then the smell of hot oil from the dumpling stall below the stair, followed by fresh-cut greens from the market boy on the corner, followed by one man in the lane sneezing so violently it sounded like a structural complaint against spring. I stayed at the table and watched the crown come fully into morning. It was beautiful. That surprised me only because I had not been making it for beauty first. My mother's side held an older grace, clean, fine, almost severe if one did not know how much tenderness lived in precision. My side answered with stronger returns, subtler give in the inner ring, slightly broader spacing in the living bloom placements. The combined work did not look mismatched. It looked as if the crown had been waiting to become itself through both of us. White lilies arced around the outer band in measured intervals. The dried wind blooms rested low and pale, their old shape hidden among living petals like memory folded into breath. A narrow strip of old white ribbon ran under the back line where no viewer would notice and every wearer would feel it. The inner silver channels, invisible unless one knew to search them with the fingertips, crossed and returned without ever trapping. My mother's hand. Mine. One work. The tea tasted like heat and resolve. By full morning, the quarter knew I had been up all night. Not because anyone saw me weaving. Because workshop streets notice lamp habits. The glass bead mender across the lane sent his apprentice with a packet of new-cut silver wire in case the palace had eaten all your decent stock. The ribbon seller from 2 doors down, the same woman who had once almost called my name on the day of the broadside, appeared with 3 lengths of narrow white silk she insisted were left from an order that never existed and therefore should not be counted in her books. A route porter from the west cargo stair brought a sack of fresh water from the cleaner upper cistern because he had a cousin on the conservatory line the night the lamp burst and didn't like the way the official account had too much polish on it. No one said "we believe you." No one needed to. The quarter did not work like the palace. It showed trust with materials, favors, and practical interference. Even the little Cooper's daughter who had carried Vivienne's note yesterday morning reappeared with a fistful of pale stair-bloom sprigs and announced solemnly that her mother said the flowers by the lower rail held longer in bad wind than the market kinds. Then she asked whether princes really smelled different from other men. Master Ilara chased her out with a spoon before I had to answer and ruin both our dignity. The crown sat at the center of the table through all of it. People saw it. Of course they did. Some looked and then looked away at once, as if understanding without understanding that they were in the presence of something not made for ordinary purchase. Others stood longer. The bead mender's apprentice crossed himself in the old route worker way before leaving the silver wire spool. Master Ilara saw and did not mock him. At noon, when the front light shifted and the street began its louder trade hour, Master Ilara shut the front door for 10 full minutes and turned the lock. The sound brought the room to stillness. She came to the back with her apron still on and folded her arms. "If you're going," she said, "say it." My hand was resting on the crown's inner band. I looked up at her. There was no softness in her face, only the sort of severity built by women who have learned that tenderness spoken too sweetly makes some people mistreat it. The bead mender's apprentice had not left fully after all. He stood half hidden in the front room near the ribbon rack, clearly intending to make himself useful if not invisible. The ribbon seller had lingered by the threshold under the pretense of choosing mourning silk. The West porter sat on the front step with his cap in his hands as if he merely needed to rest his feet and had accidentally become part of a moment larger than he knew. They were all waiting. Not for permission, for clarity. I looked at the crown again, at the old silver, the living white, the answered line. Then I stood up. "I'm going back," I said. No one spoke. The room held. I put both hands flat on the table because I wanted the wood under them, the work under them, the quarter under them while I said the part that mattered most. Not because the palace wants me contained closer to their records. Not because the broadside frightened me enough to run in the right direction for them. Not because I'm being called. I swallowed once. Because I choose to go. The words settled through the room like the clean drop of a weight finding its true place in water. Master Ilara nodded once. That was all. Then the ribbon seller said from the doorway, "About time." The bead apprentice laughed too loudly because he was young enough to find nerves entertaining. The West porter stood up as if a meeting had ended and asked which route up I meant to take because the lower public lifts were already overcrowded and the East Courier lanes would be faster if I had proper cause to use them. I stared at him. He stared back, surprised by my surprise. "What?" he said. "You think we'd let you hike up 12 terrace levels carrying that thing by yourself?" The thing in question being the crown. I looked down at it, absurdly moved all over again. Master Ilara snorted. If she tried, she'd arrive too late and with bad posture. The ribbon seller came in fully then and set the 3 lengths of white silk on my table without asking whether I still wanted them. "For securing the carry box against wind," she said. "The upper routes shake this season." The bead apprentice dumped the extra silver wire spool beside the silk. "For emergency mending." The cooper's daughter, who had somehow come back in through the rear lane while no one was watching properly, held up her stair blooms like an offering. "For luck," she said, then frowned as if luck sounded too childish. "Or for not dying." That, for some reason, was what nearly made me cry again. I laughed instead, shaky and bright at once. "Thank you," I said, and because this was my street, my quarter, my people, and they deserved the truth as much as anyone in the palace ever had, I added, "I'm going back to open something they were never meant to seal." The porter blinked. The ribbon seller crossed her arms. The bead apprentice grinned in a way that would get him into trouble with beautiful efficiency one day. Master Ilara only said, "Then stop talking and pack." The next hour passed in motion. Not palace bustle. Real motion. Hands that know time by weight and stares by breath. Master Ilara found the old carrying case we used for aristocratic display crowns back when the quarter still trusted Upper Island money enough to build for it. She cut out the velvet lining with a knife because velvet snagged the hidden inner returns and lined the box instead with plain felt and the white silk lengths from the ribbon seller. The bead apprentice reinforced the clasp hinge with his extra silver wire under my direction. The porter went to the East Courier lane and came back with word that one of the mid-route skiffs still made direct rise to the upper administration quarter before sunset if the pilot could be bribed with enough coin or moral urgency. "Which do you have?" he asked. "2/3 of a proper purse and an excellent reason," I said. "Good enough." While the others moved, I made the final additions to the crown. Not structural work. That was done. Living marks. 3 fresh stair blooms from the cooper's daughter at the lower back arc where luck had no business mattering and therefore mattered most. A thread of the ribbon seller's white silk under the outer lily line to protect the carry from snagging. One tiny silver brace from the bead apprentice tucked into the inside clasp of the box because breakage always comes where pretty people forget to reinforce. And from Master Ilara, without comment, a pinch of preservative resin ground with bitter leaf and cedar, the exact practical workshop mixture that kept living blooms steady through rough transport, and said, in its own unromantic way, come back with this still whole asterisk. When I finally set the crown into the lined case, the whole work seemed to draw the room quieter around it. Not because it glowed. Not because old route magic burst from the petals for the convenience of bystanders. Because everyone there could see, even without understanding the full shape of it, that this crown was not a customer piece. Not merchandise. Not ornament. A threshold carried in 2 hands. Master Ilara closed the case lid herself and fastened the clasp. "You know this doesn't make me approve of princes," she said. "I would have been worried if it did." "Good." She handed me the case. "Carry from the bottom, not the handle, when the route wind shifts. The hidden side will bear uneven if it twists." I took it. The weight settled into my arms with a strange rightness. Not light. Not burdensome. The exact feel of something finished and still becoming. The workshop quarter escorted me out like a conspiracy with very good manners. Not a parade. Nothing so foolish. The porter walked ahead to clear the fastest path through the lower steps. The ribbon seller took one side lane to wave us around a stalled produce cart before we hit it. The bead apprentice ran ahead twice to hold lift cages that would otherwise have gone up full. The cooper's daughter got no farther than the second landing before Master Ilara sent her home with such precision that the child obeyed and looked honored by the command. Master Ilara herself walked with me to the East Courier Court and no farther. The court lay between the middle trade levels and the administrative rise, not grand enough for noble travel and too efficient to be comfortable. Courier skiffs came and went there in hard turns and quick dockings, carrying sealed packets, urgent people, and the sort of truths that never rode publicly. The platforms smelled of wind oil, rope burn, brass, and the cleaner edge of high route current. The porter had done his work. A narrow 2-passenger skiff with a white-haired pilot and a disagreeable face waited under the East Rise marker, its route sail half drawn and its guide lamp already charged. "He says 1 bag only," the porter muttered. "I told him you were carrying a wedding crown for the upper quarter and lateness would cause 3 rich women to die of opinion." The pilot spat over the side. "I said 1 bag and 1 passenger. I didn't say I cared about the women." Master Ilara eyed him. "Do you care about coin?" "Immensely." She pressed 3 silver pieces into his hand before I could stop her. "Master Ilara, shut up," she said. "This is an investment in my inventory returning." It was the closest thing to an embrace she was ever likely to permit in public. I shifted the crown case carefully to one arm and reached for her without thinking. For a heartbeat I thought she might step back. Instead she let me hold her once, hard and brief and smelling of resin and lamp smoke and the whole life that had made me. "Finish what you're making," she said into my hair, low enough that the porter and pilot could pretend not to hear. "Then come back and tell me whether the prince was worth this level of trouble." I laughed against the ache in my throat. "That's an unfair question. Most worthwhile ones are." When I pulled back, her eyes were dry and fierce and entirely unsentimental. "Thank every star." I took the skiff. The East Rise route climbed in long, fast arcs over the middle terraces, narrower and swifter than the public lanes and therefore less forgiving of people who wished to admire the view. The pilot did not waste words once we lifted. Good. I had none to spare. The workshop quarter fell below me in working lines and smoke and afternoon gold. From above, our street looked smaller than I ever felt inside it. The signboard for Belrose and Ilara caught one shard of light and flashed pale once before the skiff turned. Then the middle terraces widened, stair after stair, roof after roof, courtyards stitched between them like practical seamwork. Children ran across one sunlit roof bridge trailing laundry ribbon. A brewer's yard below had set out rows of dark casks. At the far west edge of the visible city, route towers flashed in measured sequence as freight lines adjusted for evening shift. I should have used the rise to think. Instead I felt. Not regret. Not exactly. Something tighter and more alive. I was going back. Not to be chosen. Not to be saved. Not even, entirely, because he had not let me go. I was going back because the crown in my lap could answer the capital seal, because Oren had moved the lie into public hands and would move the truth next if we waited, because the great rout above Firelea was no longer legend but mechanism and Julian would die before letting the city fall if cornered there alone. And because in the storm tower, in the hidden gallery, in every old chamber that had answered us, the road had already been teaching me what kind of return it required. Not surrender. Answer. The pilot swore softly and corrected the rise line. I looked up. The sky over the upper city had changed. At first I thought it was only late cloud moving in from the western side. The day had been clear enough when I left the quarter, only a few high pale bands over the capital and some ordinary haze over the lower freight lanes. Now the air above Virea's Crown Islands held a strange thickness to it, not storm-dark yet, but tense, as if the sky itself had drawn breath and failed to let it go. Then the route lines pulsed. Every silver lane over the visible city brightened at once. Not normally. Too strongly. A hard white flare running the length of the capital routes in one vast synchronized beat. The skiff dipped. The pilot cursed. Somewhere below, a tower bell started ringing before the flare had even fully faded. I gripped the crown case so hard the edges bit my palms. The next pulse came slower, deeper, not a surface flicker like the burst lamp sabotage. Not a local break. The whole route net over the capital seemed to throb from somewhere above and beyond the visible city, sending light down through the ordinary lanes as if a second larger road had moved behind them all. My breath stopped. The great route. I knew it with the kind of certainty that has no proof yet and no mercy. The seal over the capital was moving. The pilot hauled the skiff into a higher climb to avoid a lower courier crossing that had just lost clean guidance for 2 breaths. Below us, people on the upper walkways were stopping in clusters to look up. Garden route lamps along one palace-adjacent bridge flashed too bright, dimmed, and then steadied badly. A pleasure barge near the inner lake spun half a point offline before its pilot corrected. All around the city, the sky had begun to beat. Not thunder, not lightning. A vast slow pulse passing through route light and air alike, too broad to belong to any single tower or sabotage housing. The silver lines over Virelea bent inward toward the palace quarter as if tugged from above. One high route arch over the north administrative wing cracked with a sound I heard even from the skiff. A spray of white light spilled from the break and vanished into the thinning daylight. The pilot went white around the mouth. "What is that?" he said. I did not answer because I could not. The third pulse hit. This one shook the skiff hard enough that the crown case slid in my lap and I caught it against my chest by instinct. Over the capital center, where the palace and administrative islands met under the old highest air, a silver shape flashed into existence for less than a heartbeat. Too large for a public route mark. Too structured for lightning. A crown of lines unfolding and slamming shut again over the city. The great route seal was not only moving, it was failing. The pilot shoved the skiff higher. "We're turning down to the lower administration dock. The upper lane's gone unstable." "No," I said, louder than I meant to. "Higher." He stared at me as if I had asked him to row into a fire. "The upper lane will shear." "I know." The words came out with a steadiness I did not feel, because suddenly everything had narrowed. The quarter below. The palace ahead. The crown in my arms. The hidden old chamber warning. The Vaurturn structure. Julian somewhere in that city of white stone and route chambers and pressure, under a sky beginning to come apart exactly where the old records said it would. The pilot swore again, more devoutly this time. Lady, if I go higher and the line snaps, we all die expensive. I met his eyes. Then don't miss. Maybe it was the tone. Maybe it was the crown case in my arms and the fact that even a rude pilot knows when someone is carrying the kind of object people kill for quietly. Maybe he simply had more courage than manners and not enough time left to regret either. He hauled the skiff into the upper rise. The city beneath us lurched into crisis by degrees. Bells began ringing from 3 towers at once. Not in sequence. Alarm and route warning overlapping. 2 palace-adjacent skywalks went dark, then relit on emergency lower feed. People on the terraces below began moving faster, then running. Along the far east quarter, a freight line flashed and disappeared altogether, sending a heavy cargo rig into a low emergency drift the tugs barely caught. And over the capital center the sky pulsed again, broader than before, as if some invisible heart above the city had begun to beat wrong. I wrapped one arm around the crown case and with the other reached into my coat pocket for Julian's star pin. It pressed small and sharp into my palm. I'm coming, I said, though the pilot could not hear me over the bells and the wind and the first screaming sounds rising from the upper city below. Ahead of us, over Virelia's white towers, the great route convulsed in the hidden air.